Hi, it's Valerie from A Stitch in Life. Today's video, I am actually going to show you some vintage hand sewing techniques. Let's go. So you remember that I told you to go get this book. This is the more modern one. This is the 94, I think, 93 or 94. This was printed, and then the other one was 76. I think there's only two versions. I actually like the 76 one better because I like that era, and I like to see the fabrics and the fashions in there versus the fashions in here. So it's totally up to you. The stuff that's actually in here, the meat of the stuff, it's the same. In this book, you will find a section that says hand sewing techniques and tips. It will have all sorts of different basic sewing, hand sewing techniques, how to knot at the end of your thread, what backstitch, even stitch, half backstitch. I mean, I know how to do these, but I never called them different names like that. I guess if you want to do a specific technique, you can look on here and really get it down. What's great too is there's a lot of hand sewing hem techniques, which is really important, especially if you are making vintage style garments. You do need to do the hem by hand. Sewing it on the machine is definitely, I mean, it's not like they didn't have that done, but it makes it look more professional, more custom, more vintage. Also, they have, besides all the hand techniques like how to make a hand buttonhole, it does take a very precise hand sewing technique. Practicing and practicing, of course, makes it look better and better. It's all about visual when you're hand sewing. I don't want to say structure because it is very strong. This is like couture sewing. This is going to be, and you're going to get the look that you really want exact. Versus sewing on the machine, sometimes it can get away from you. Your stitching can be a little bit off. This comes with time, with practice, to getting it more, straight and even. But hand sewing, I actually started sewing by hand sewing because I like to have that control myself and to make it look exactly what I want it to be. Sewing stuff by hand, like doing a back stitch or a running stitch, is difficult only because even for me, it is hard to do it exactly. And that's where the practice comes in. Exactly, the right width and the right back stitch width. Those kinds of sewing techniques are more difficult, but doing the hand hem is actually, for me, a lot of fun because it is like that if you like to knit or crochet or embroider or do anything that does take time. That's my sewing therapy, is hand sewing, because you can really just do the same thing over and over, try to get your stitches the same. I love doing that. But what I'm going to show you today, that was just an introduction to where you can find it in this book. There are some other techniques I'm going to show you, but I wanted to show you vintage hand sewing techniques that people used to do more than they do now that can make your garments just a little bit more. So the first one is bra keeps. If you've ever seen bra keeps, you usually would find them in vintage garments. And they are what they sound like they are. They're either made with thread or sometimes with a ribbon. And they have a snap on the end of the little tail. If you do it by hand and with a thread, it's going to be crocheted into a chain stitch. And then at the end, you'll have a snap. It's a very tiny snap. And what it does is you do the chain stitch, you put the snap, you put that snap under your bra and you snap it over on the other side of your dress, and it keeps your bras in place. Bra keep. That's the whole idea. And you will find them on a lot of vintage suit dresses and other vintage dresses that might just have a skinny strap, but you can put them on there yourself. And that's the fun part. If you use ribbon, which is easy as well, you just have to fold over the ribbon so it doesn't fray. You have to put it on the dress and fold it over so it doesn't fray, and then put the snap on the other side, and not sew the snap and the thread through to the outside right at the shoulder seam, because you do have extra fabric right there at the seam. This is a serge dress, so there's a seam allowance right there that's serge that I could put it to, and that way my bra doesn't come out like this, or my dress even can go off like that depending on the type of dress, right? So those bra keeps help keep your dress up as well. So the next one is a hand sewn hem, and there's different ways to do that, and this actually has 3 different kinds of stitches here. If you can see those, they call them something that, I mean, I don't call them, it says blanket stitch basting, and the other one says catch stitch basting, and this one says heavy duty basting. I don't call it basting at all. I call it hand sewing. I do like this one. It's called catch stitch basting, which I will show you how I do that. When I worked in theater, we called that cross stitching. It wasn't cross stitching, but what you were doing was you were sewing on one side this way, and then you would come down to the other side and sew up, and then sew up. So you're making like a cross, you know, like an X. So, and you're going across to the fabric, to the hem, to the fabric, to the hem. That's just something that everybody called it so that we could remember which stitch that we wanted our seamsters to do. And everybody was on the same page. That's not what it's actually called, but that's just what we called it. So the next technique I'm going to talk about, it's not hand sewing, it's sewing a dart. And a lot of people, what they do when they get to the point of the dart, they backstitch right there. And that actually creates a lot of bulk, and sometimes a little bit of tucking. So when you press it, it doesn't lay flat, it doesn't lay nicely. So instead, to sew off of the dart, sew out of the fabric, don't backstitch there, and then leave a tail of thread, and you can either go back, you know, have the machine still attached, don't cut it off, go back into the meat of the dart and backstitch there, and so you'll have this like little tail thing. You'll see that sometimes in vintage garments, or if you just sew off the end, you can tie it at the end, but you don't want to tie the threads too tight or you'll get that same little pucker right there. I like to sew off of it and use a smaller stitch at the point of the dart and then go back and back stitch in there, because it will start to open up as well, and that's a problem. You don't want that either. So if you just use smaller stitches when you get to the end of the dart, as long as you're doing the dart exactly where you want to, you know you're not going to have to rip it out. Maybe if you're just basting it first, just sewing it normally first, trying it on, seeing if it needs to be adjusted before doing the tiny stitches at the end, that would be great. Picture here in the book that how you sew off. Then you have like this tail right there, and you cut that off, and then they have it where they knot it at the end. Okay, the last tip I'm going to give about sewing vintage is swing tacks. If you guys know what swing tacks are, I think they might call them something else here. But basically, if you are making a garment that has a lining, whether it's a dress or a coat, some people do sew the lining all the way to the other garment. When you do that, you could twist them a little bit and it's just so uncomfortable and it doesn't fit and it pulls weird. Or one fabric can shrink faster than the other. You know, there's all sorts of problems. Instead, for the skirt part, sometimes people do it for the bodice as well. They have, like, say it's a dress, and they have the dress and then they have the lining exactly cut like the dress. Of course, you're going to finish off all of the armhole, the neck, everything like that. Then after that, it is loose underneath the garment. So it's not sewn down to the garment. So you do swing tacks, which is just crocheting. They have a picture here. You hand crochet. You take a bite of the garment itself, say like at the side seam, probably right at the waist. You take a bite of the fabric and then you just start hand crocheting, and then when you're done you sew through the loop if you know how to do that, and then you sew it to the lining. Now you don't want to have your chain be too long, otherwise you will get this lining like really twisted inside. So you want it to be short for here. On the hem you can have it be a little bit longer, but the whole idea is that they're not together. They don't shrink differently and then just ruin the dress. They are loose, but at the same time anchored down so it doesn't get out of place. So thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. I post once a week. I post about different kinds of sewing techniques I will show you, and then some of the upcycles that I do myself, hopefully to inspire you to get to sewing. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.